Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Shroyer, a career positioning strategist, professor, and someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what it really means to grow in a world that just won't stop changing. Welcome to the Technically Human podcast. This podcast is about navigating your career, your identity, and your next chapter in a world that's shaped by AI, technology, and constant change. Here, we're going to talk about real stuff. We're going to talk about career pivots, uncertainty, reinvention, and mostly how to stay grounded in who you are while everything around you evolves. Are you ready to go? Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Technically Human podcast. Thank you for joining us again for this episode. So, in this episode, I want to talk about the top 5 human skills that are going to matter the most in the age of AI. So, I've been thinking a lot about AI lately, and not just because it's everywhere. It is really hard to get away from it, right? But every day there's a new headline about AI changing work, replacing jobs, or transforming industries. And those conversations really do matter. But I started to find myself asking a different question that I've been asking as well when I put together this podcast is if everyone has access to these same AI tools, what is going to help differentiate people? What's going to set them apart, make them unique, and show that they have value within organizations? And I don't think it's going to be that person who knows the most prompts. Prompts are great to know and how to use them. I think it's going to be that person who can develop those strong human capabilities. Throughout my career in corporate leadership and higher education, research, and coaching, I've seen technology evolve over and over again. The tools change, but the human capability is what lasts. So I want to get into what are some of these top skills that are important to have, and what are some ways that you can make sure that you're practicing those skills versus just getting behind the keyboard and making sure that you're strong in AI. Because what's going to be beneficial down the road is that you have those skills from a technical perspective and how much you can dabble in it. But what's going to be even greater is those human skills that you have. So let's talk about these top 5 that we have. The first skill that I want to touch on is adaptability. And the reason to focus on adaptability as one of those human skills is that in the past, when we had change in organizations, it used to be an event. Like something big is going to happen, and there was a big change. Maybe it was an organizational restructuring. Maybe it was a new big project that was going on that was going to introduce something to the business or to the business partners, customers, things like that. When we think about change being an event in the past, there are several different models of change that we can use. One that I have read a lot about and even integrated into my dissertation research work was John Kotter. And John Kotter talks about leading change and what are the main steps involved in the process of change and what to think about and make sure that you're not leaving out. What has happened over time is change has transitioned from being an event to becoming the environment that we work in. Change is constant, right? There's always things going on. And it's really important to make sure that we have, instead of a fixed mindset, that we have a growth mindset. And that concept comes about from Carol Dweck. She writes a lot about that and focuses on that. So making sure that we are open and we are adaptable to grow and to learn and to change and to become what we need to be to support the organization and the people in the organization. So if we go back and we think about when ChatGPT first arrived, and it's only been a couple years, right? You had a choice. You could ignore it, or you could jump on that curiosity bandwagon and you could become a learner again. And so one of the things that I did was I got curious and jumped in to start playing with it, to learn it. I wasn't somebody who jumped in automatically to what course can I take, but it's let's tinker in this and That's always been my mindset of being able to get in there and figure out what's going on, see if you can break it, those types of things, but not ignoring it, but really being interested in what opportunities, what possibilities came about as a result of using this kind of tool. There's been a lot of changes in organizations that I've been a part of, whether it be from a corporate perspective or academic perspective. And it's thinking about instead of automatically saying, no, that's a terrible idea, it's how can we look at the possibilities that this change can bring? And how can we be supportive of it? What pieces maybe can we be supportive of it? Because sometimes we're hesitant overall, right? But how can we learn more and get curious instead of automatically shutting it before we even open the door, automatically saying no before we even open the door? Just a smidge to look in and to see what opportunities are there. So, what I would encourage for adaptability is making sure that you are getting curious, that you are having that growth mindset. Dig in and learn a little bit more about growth mindset and what does that look like versus having a fixed mindset. Being open. And for some people, this is really easy and others, it's really challenging. So if you are one of those people where it's challenging, I would encourage you to see, is there some small baby step I can take to get a little bit more curious, to ask questions, to learn more, to see maybe if it's AI that you're hesitant about, are there features that are in AI that could help you? You can ask yourself, what did you learn this week as you're looking back on the week or as you're going into the week? What are some things that I could learn? What are some opportunities that I have ahead of me? And also, a lot of times we feel like change happens and we're not consulted first, right? Definitely had that experience. And what we need to do is shift that mindset from when this unexpected event happens, instead of saying, why me? And becoming that victim, putting on those victim glasses. It's what's the opportunity? What are the things that could happen? What could go right? And a lot of times I know it's really hard and we're stuck in that moment and it can be extremely emotional too, depending on what it is. And it's also how can I look at this differently so that I am figuring out where I go from here and what are the good things that could come out of this? Am I open to what some of those good things could be? And shifting our mindset. And I know that can be so challenging. I've been through a lot of things personally and professionally, and this has not been easy. And I have definitely had to practice it. And I didn't do this at first. It took a lot of different things that have happened to really start to adjust it. And a lot of people say everything happens for a reason, whether you believe that or not. It's thinking about, okay, if change happened, something impacted me, how do I look at this with that growth mindset and being open and adaptable to what tomorrow looks like, to what the next month looks like, to what the next few years look like? And so adaptability is such an important skill to make sure that we have, especially because of the fact, like I mentioned, that change isn't an event like it used to be years ago. It's a constant thing that's going on. So being adaptable is so important because when you get into an environment, no matter how much you might think that everything's going to stay the same, and maybe it will, a lot of industries are seeing so much evolution and so much change. How many years ago were we sitting there and artificial intelligence was not as much of a highlight as it is today? Granted, it's been around. We've had guests before that talked about even in the 70s and 80s, there was work on artificial intelligence. It's more in the last couple of years that it's been brought more to the public and how can we leverage these tools and these platforms to access it. And now it's really thinking about how can we adapt and shift and change even when we don't expect that's going to happen, being open to that and expecting the unexpected. And sometimes that can lead to amazing things. I know when we're in the moment and we're in the heart of it, it doesn't feel like that at all. But once we start to shift our mindset, there's a lot of different possibilities that can start to come in once we open that door a little bit, right? So the next human skill I want to touch on, we're going to do a countdown. So number 5 was adaptability. Number 4 is emotional intelligence. So AI, we could put into ChatGPT, here's a conversation I had or a transcript from a recording, and it can summarize that. But it cannot build trust with another human being. You can even try within your ChatGPT or other tools to, how do I make sure that this sounds more like I'm trying to build trust and things like that. But there's a difference between you sending an email or sending out meeting notes or things like that to you being face to face or on a phone call, whatever that might be, and having that conversation. You're not going to push a button and push buttons on your computer for AI to have that conversation. Why do we need you in the picture if that's the case, right? So making sure that we think about emotional intelligence. And if you've not heard of this concept before, Daniel Goleman is someone that you will want to know in relation to emotional intelligence. There's a book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. You can go in, and when you buy the book or however you purchase it, you can get access to take the assessment, and there's questions in the book as well. And you can see out of the 5 categories that are part of emotional intelligence, what are some things that maybe you need to focus on. Another thing when we think about emotional intelligence that has come to light, I would say there's been a lot of research over the years about this. I am maybe seeing more because of being involved with a former student on a study related to psychological safety. And Amy Edmondson is the individual who brought this concept to life. And how do we feel psychologically safe in the workplace? So when we think about emotional intelligence, psychological safety, all of these aspects, we want to think about, how is trust built in the organization? Do people trust each other? Do they trust their leaders, their managers? Are they only trusting certain individuals in the organization? How do you make this shift? Because that can be a lot related to the culture of the organization. And if you don't have trust, has to be that foundation. If you don't have trust, it's going to be really hard to navigate, whether it's a change, whether it's day-to-day processes. There's going to be a lot of gossip. There's going to be a lot of employees that are challenged. There's going to be a lot of employees that are considering, where do I go from here? Like, how do I, maybe an exit plan? How do I escape the organization? Trust is critical. And trust is really important too, because I talk about psychological safety, but we think about safety in itself. And some organizations, how crucial it is to make sure that there are safety precautions in place. And if you don't have trust in an organization, especially in one of those organizations where it could be a life or death kind of situation or somebody getting hurt because of something, maybe a plant, manufacturing plant situation, then not having trust can be really scary. So we want to make sure that we build trust within the organization. I also think of this when I think from a professor standpoint. I want to build trust in my classroom, right? I want to make sure that students trust that not only I have the credibility to teach what I'm teaching them, but also being able to trust that I am there to support them in their journey, to help them understand the materials, to be able to help them make connections between, why do I have to learn this? How does this have anything to do with when I'm done with college and I'm out in that real world, right? What are those connections there? How do we bridge between theory and practice? And also trusting that I want the best for them, and trusting that I'm going to challenge them to the degree that it is appropriate to help them to learn and to grow in their time that they're with me in the classroom and in their college experience. So, one of the things I would challenge you to do when we think about emotional intelligence, absolutely, if you're interested in this, you want to take a look, you can Google about emotional intelligence and Daniel Goleman, and even learning about the 5 categories of it. You can access the book that I mentioned, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. But some simple things you can do, even before going into some of those pieces, is listening, making sure that you are listening to what coworkers, employees, leaders, those individuals, listening to what they're saying. And there's a big difference between hearing and listening, right? Listening, we're actually taking that in, we're digesting it. And a lot of times when we listen, we're able to regurgitate. So, what I'm hearing you say is this, and really being able to take some action and be supportive is probably that next step from listening. But not listening to be able to respond, but just really sitting and listening to the individuals and starting to hear the things that they're not saying that they're really saying, right? If we think about their nonverbal body language, the nonverbal communication, those different, the tone, the inflection, those types of things, what is coming across and what they're saying to you versus just hearing what they're saying. You can ask someone, how can I better support you? What are some things that I can do? Especially if somebody's having a challenging time, but especially if somebody's not having a challenging time. If they are struggling and maybe you don't know it, how can I better support you? And another thing, the last thing here is pausing before you send a difficult email. Also thinking about, do you send the email or do you have the conversation? Because those difficult topics, especially when it's one-on-one with an individual, are so much better if you have them face to face, even if it's in a virtual environment like a Zoom or you're on the phone with them versus sending an email. Because if we think about it, and I think about even my dad sending a text, and when he first started texting, he would send all capital letters and how that comes across. And a lot of people think that's like screaming or yelling, how that comes across. So being able to talk to him and say, you need to make sure that's not all capital letters, that kind of thing. So the tone, the inflection, what people are taking away, they're telling their own story when you're sending an email, right? And sometimes that's the only option, especially if it's in a big group of people. And thinking about where do we need to have those conversations so that we can continue to build trust where possible. We can continue to make sure that people feel safe, especially psychologically safe, and they have the opportunity to ask questions, to get more insight. And employees and individuals overall just feel better when those conversations, we can't escape the difficult conversations in life, but having those and figuring out and really thinking about how do we approach that versus just automatically throwing out a text or throwing out an email. Is that the right thing for those individuals and to be supportive of them? So, our number three is leadership and influence. So I don't think we talk about this enough. So AI doesn't implement change. AI is a tool or a platform that we use. People are the ones that are going to implement any type of change that goes on. One of the concepts that I talk about in my leadership class more extensively, as well as in my management class, a little bit we touch on, is transformational leadership. And Base and Avolio are two individuals who I've read many of their articles, especially when I was in my dissertation research phases. So when we think about leadership and influence, one thing I would recommend is learning more about transformational leadership. And the opposite of transformational leadership is transactional leadership. So this, in my mind, goes really well with when we think about what is the difference between a manager and a leader. Transactional leadership pairs really nicely with a manager. It's what are the transactions? I need to do this for you and you do this for me. So it's really what's that transaction? When we think about leadership, it's more of that transformation and what happens over time. And we think about for transformation, you can even think about the butterfly coming out of the cocoon and transforming over time and how that tells more of a magical story, right? And the feeling that invokes versus just a transaction and what happens. So how can we be a leader and how can we have that transformational experience. And you know what? In some roles, there are tasks and there are things that we do that are absolutely transactional. It doesn't mean that you have to be one or the other. You do have those manager type of tasks that you have, and that's perfectly fine. Not everything you do needs to have that transformational aspect, that leadership aspect. A lot of roles, especially the best roles, I would say, are a great mix of both. And the higher up that you get in an organization, the more transformational leadership starts to peek its head out versus just having that transactional. I would say there's very few transactional pieces when you get to more of those executive levels. It absolutely has a lot to do with you being a leader, that transformational leadership, the ability to give a vision, a strategy to those people that you are leading, that are following you, and being able to support them and give them that opportunity to be adaptable, to have that growth mindset, all of those different things. Another thing when we think about leadership and influence also is thinking about John Cotter. So I talked about him with relation to his steps in the change process. He has a book called Leading Change. It's by John Cotter. It's really good. He walks through all of those steps for his process. And it talks about, as a leader, what are some things that you need to do within that process to influence those individuals that you are supporting and that are following you and that are in the organization. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story about leadership and influence. So I had the experience when I was in the product area. We had decided to do a survey of the employees that we had within our different teams that we worked with in the product organization. And we wanted to get insight of these individuals and their perception of what would be most helpful from a learning perspective. We wanted to really kind of reset the learning strategy as to something that was going to be beneficial. We didn't want to do things the way that we've always done them. We wanted to make sure that we were really focused on the individuals that are leveraging the tools that we were creating or curating, and make sure that those were helpful pieces or helpful pathways for them to understand the material to be able to support their external customers or their internal business partners. And so I worked with my manager and we put together the survey, and we really refined it to make sure that it was something that was quick and easy for individuals to take. There was a variety of methods that you answered, so it wasn't just all radio buttons, pick one or pick two, that kind of thing. And so it was different than other surveys that had been done in the organization, and that we were asking questions that were capturing the data that was going to help us to figure out, where do we go from here? What do we do? What changes do we make? And so we sent the survey out. We decided we're going to keep it open. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 weeks. This was so many years ago. So we decided, let's say we kept it open for 3 weeks. And what we were doing also on the back end was looking at, okay, how many people are completing the survey each day? And I think we even looked at each week. And we were seeing, and you expect when you have surveys that go out that you're not going to get a huge response. Any kind of questionnaires or surveys that you send out, typically response rates are really low, and you have to expect that, even though it's hard to hear. So we were looking up even what are some of these typical response rates, or and then how do you boost the response rates? How do you get more employees to respond? So you may be familiar with this when you think about employee opinion surveys within organizations. And I know that ended up being somewhat competitive in the organization that I was in, because they would publish like 82% of employees within this organization completed the employee opinion survey. You have 6 days left to complete this. So in our group, we were looking at, okay, what's our response rate? And we are getting an okay response rate, but it was like, we know people have opinions, especially in the small group that we were in. We were like, we know that there's more people out there. There's more people complaining, or there's more people saying, I like this, or I don't like this, things like that. So, what we ended up doing is we had a couple connects with our VP, and we talked with, it was my manager, it was the director, it was the VP. We were all in a room. And I think in most instances, it was virtual because we were in different locations, and sat down and said, okay, here's where we are. Here's what we're trying to achieve. We're not feeling like we're getting the results that will be really beneficial. There's more out there. We can feel it. And so the VP said, let me send an email. And he ended up sending an email out to the audience for the survey and encouraged them and said, this is going to really help us to make change. I know sometimes as individuals, you might take a survey or and not see something happen, but this is so crucial and important to us help you to help your customers, whether they're internal or external. And what we ended up seeing, he actually did it twice during the 3 weeks that we had the survey open. And he also asked his direct reports, so all of the directors he had underneath him, he asked them to forward that out to his employees as a reminder, like a couple days after he sent it. So what we were able to see from that experience is that our numbers jumped. I think at one point we were at like 5% return rate. Then we got to 10, and we're like, 10, I think 10 to 15 was like pretty damn good. And we ended up getting, I want to say we ended almost around 35% by the end of that 3 week period, 35% response rate, which was phenomenal. So we were able to then take that data and make some real strong recommendations as to what do we do and what tweaks or changes do we make, what could be helpful. And then out of those recommendations and changes, are there things that maybe we pilot at first? Maybe it's not rush right out and do something, but here are these things that based on the responses, this could work. We also looked at maybe we have a couple focus groups, and in our survey, we also invited individuals, if you would be interested in being part of a focus group, please leave your email because we did make it anonymous. I think we might have asked them what department they were in to get some sense because there were some differences in the departments, but we asked them, if you want to be a part of a deeper dive focus group, leave your email and we can go into that. So that's just a great example of leadership and influence, because that VP was able to use his position and his influence, the people in the departments and his leadership, to help us to get the feedback that we needed. Another thing that can be really helpful when we think about leadership and influence is how can we get information out to individuals in the organization. And maybe it's not always like the town hall. Maybe it can be presenting at a town hall and giving insight and information to individuals. There's also been instances where I've been able to go into a VP's meeting with his directs and talk with those directors and share information at a high level, at the level that makes sense for them, and offer to go in and do. We several times I've been in areas where we did road shows, and we go in and go to a meeting with that department and with the individuals that are working, frontline employees, and being able to share information with them. So those are types of things where you can spread influence and then also leadership. Some of the other things that you can do are explaining the why. So if any of you have read or heard Simon Sinek, he talks about why. Giving that context, diving deeper into the importance of something. Also thinking about how do we coach instead of immediately go into problem solving, and how do we fix this. In prior roles that I had, we did many exercises related to agile and try not to go immediately to solving the problem and here are solutions, but coaching and working through the different pieces before you identify what the solutions are. Because one of the big things too is when you go immediately to here's the solution, is you are not thinking about what is the problem and making sure that you have the right problem. Because if you go immediately to solutioning, you may be solving the wrong thing. And it's not really the root cause or the core problem that you have. Another thing you can do from a leadership and influence perspective is recognizing someone. And when I looked up some information, it was talking about public recognition, but not everybody likes public recognition. People have different things that motivate them. People have different things that they like to, different ways that they like to be recognized. So making sure that you understand that with the people that you work with or work for, even business partners, and being able to recognize them. And that shows your leadership as well. All right, we got two more here. So the next one is critical thinking and judgment. So one of the things that I like to ask AI when I leverage it is, what assumptions are you making? Because you can key in information and not be telling everything, or if I use it to help me with bullet points on a resume, it can make a lot of assumptions and not be accurate in telling what's true, right? So thinking about how are we making decisions with the information that we have. One of the things that I teach in my management course is by Herbert Simon. He talked about this concept of bounded rationality. And bounded rationality is basically you're making a decision within the bounds of what you know. What is the information that you have available to you? And as a leader, as a professional, you should strive to make sure that you have that as much information as you can possibly have within the bounds of the time that you have to get it, the resources that you have to get it, all of those things. But it's how can I make the best decision with the information that I have as of that place and time that you need to do it. One of the things that's really important here is making sure, and this is interesting because there's a lot of conversation in the college landscape and higher ed about critical thinking and how AI is taking away and students are not using critical thinking because of AI. One of the things that I've seen, and I've heard this from other professors, especially on TikTok, is that students are leveraging AI to cheat, and their outputs that they're putting on their tests or their assignments may not have correct information. Students aren't even going in and reading what the final product is, right? They're copying, pasting, submitting it. You need to make sure as an individual, and I know in organizations, there's a lot of use of AI that is happening as well as starting to happen within organizations. And how can we use it? What's the best way to use it? How do we make sure that we're being accurate? We're not making too many assumptions with using it. How do we make sure we're testing it? So it's really important that when you are leveraging AI in any aspect, is that you're looking at that output that you're getting and you're making a judgment call to say, this is what I need, this makes sense, this aligns. Or if it doesn't, you are making those changes, you're making those tweaks to ensure that you're getting what you need as the output, or you're going back and maybe asking more questions. And this can be whether you use AI or not. Just because somebody hands you information doesn't mean it's perfect and it's all buttoned up, right? Whether that's an AI tool or it's an individual. And so it's making sure rather than just accepting what is, that we're really looking through it and we're making sure that it is something that's going to help us, that those outputs are what we need. Also, thinking about what is missing. What are the pieces that we're not thinking about? Looking at an opposing person's viewpoint or thinking about the devil's advocate here. And even maybe it's leveraging AI to say, okay, here's the perspective on this project. What might the devil's advocate? What are some questions that might be there? One of the things that I heard, I listened to Cody Sanchez, her podcast, The Big Deal, and she talked with an individual, and I even did a separate podcast episode about creating AI boards. And what he ended up doing for a company and is he created profiles for these personality profile kind of thing within AI and used that as a board to mimic the actual board and then had a presentation that they were going to put in front of the board fed it into the tool and said, I want you to think about each of these board members. What are the questions? What are the concerns? What are the challenges? Where are they going to get stuck? Like all of those types of things. And was able to really think about how do I make this the best presentation I can possibly make? And it's like answering those questions before they're asked. So you're going to minimize the questions. You're going to get to a yes much quicker and much faster when you're asking for something by making sure that you're really thinking through it and slowing down and thinking about those kinds of things. All right, we're down to the number one on our list. So, number one should be no surprise, especially any of you who know me, but number one is learning agility. So, if I could recommend just one capability that for the future, this would be it. So it's making sure that we have the flexibility, and it goes with a lot of these other skills that we talked about, but being open to learning and being open to even getting curious, going out there and testing things. So there's the concept of experiential learning, which I integrate so much within my classroom, giving individuals that hands-on experience, because when we look at a lot of the research, we see that people who are actually able to get in there, put their hands in and start to think through and work through different, even real life case studies, real life scenarios, things like the real life problems. In the classroom, we'll do ethical dilemmas. And when people have the opportunity to do that, then they're able to get so much closer to the subject matter itself and be able to understand it. So think about any time that you've ever gone in and started a new job or a new job role, and when you went to learn something back in the late 1900s, I'll say, when I started a job, I went in and they had me do 3 months of training within a classroom. And then they put me out on the floor for the call center, and I was able to start taking calls. Now, towards the end of that 3 months, we did role play with others. It was very helpful, but it's not until you get out there. What they ended up doing over time is they shifted that instead of that solid 3 months, is you might be in training on a topic for a week or two, or maybe a few weeks, and you're going and getting on the phone, or you're sitting with somebody who's taking calls related to that kind of thing, or you're listening to actual calls that are happening and getting that insight of what did this person do, and maybe you're able to watch their screen and what action were they able to take from there. But really being more of that hands-on learning so you can understand what's happening. And for you too, especially thinking about if you're in an office job, you probably want to get in there, not even an office job, any kind of job, right? You want to get in there, you want to get your hands dirty, you want to start to learn. A lot of individuals are really afraid of failing. But you know what? When we think about it from this agile mindset, it's fail fast. Learn your lessons from that so you can continue to go on and learn what you need to learn. So, really being open to that. Also, being open to maybe you have to unlearn something that you had thought before in order to relearn. So, a great example of learning agility is as I think about going back to AI, the hard thing is a lot of times when you go to learn something, individuals, especially high performers, are going in and thinking that we can learn it, become a master, or become an expert in it. And that's not the case for AI. We've talked about that on other episodes too. Trying to be a master and expert in AI is a lost cause. So really being open to embracing learning, and whether that's hands-on or in other formats that maybe you don't have a choice on what they are. So learning AI, like I mentioned about, you're never going to be a master or an expert for something like this, but you can start to dig in and learn the tools. And a lot of times you understanding a couple things or a couple pieces for different tools are going to be way ahead of others, and you're going to be able to support others. You're going to be able to learn how to create efficiencies in different processes that you have, or you're going to come up with some ideas that maybe you didn't have before. So being curious and figuring out what more can you learn about something. I feel like you're never going to exhaust the ability to learn. So it's being open to that and what that can bring. A lot of students that I see in the classroom, they are going to be so successful because they're open to learning and they're open to growing and seeing where that can take them. And a lot of times when you start, especially starting into college, you think, okay, I'm going to be this particular major. But there's research that shows, I think it's an average of 5 times that people change their major, and what they end up doing, what they think that they're going to do when they come into school, and what they end up doing on the back end ends up being completely different. So just being open to where that can take you and what that could look like. Some of the ways that you can do this are by reading outside of your field, getting curious about things that are going on that may not necessarily be related to things that your field is focused on. So for me, I am in business. I do a lot in looking at technology and thinking about what are some of those things related to there. I also am very open to what are other, especially areas in the college, what are they doing? What are the pain points that they're having? What are the successes that they're having? And getting more insight on that. And another thing is thinking about how other teachers in other subjects are teaching, and are they doing something in a way that can be helpful for me? And I know in a corporate organization, a lot of times people in different organizations were able to share, here's best practices, here's things that worked for us, and you can try it. When I had managed my team, we ended up trying out different tools to be able to track our progress and being open to what that could do and learning from what other teams were doing and just diving in. Another way for learning agility is to teach other people something that you learned. And this helps us to continue to lock that in for ourselves, but open other people up to the experience as well. You can experiment with a different tool each month with maybe it's reading a book, being part of a book club and learning from what you are reading and what you're going through, learning from other people. You can learn so many different interpersonal skills from other individuals, but also depending on what the book is, what are some different topics that you can talk about. As we wrap up this episode, I just want to share with you again the 5 that we talked about. So the first one was adaptability, then emotional intelligence, leadership and influence, critical thinking and judgment, and learning agility. So I don't think that the future belongs to people who know the most about AI. It's going to belong to the people who keep learning, who keep asking better questions, who are adaptable, that are building trust, and that are helping other people to grow. Technology may become the great equalizer of information, but human capability is going to remain the great differentiator, and that's going to help set you apart and make you unique and adding value into what you do. As you finish this episode, I don't want you to work on all 5 of the skills I talked about. That's a whole lot, right? And it could be overwhelming. I want you to pick one. I want you to practice it intentionally this week, because small habits repeated consistently are what is going to build extraordinary leaders. Technology might change how we work, but it's our humanity that is going to determine how we lead. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks again for listening to the Technically Human podcast. If you are navigating a career shift or you're just feeling like something needs to change, remember you do not have to figure it out alone. You can find tools, strategy, and support inside the Compass. Learn more at www.careercompassusa.com. And if this episode helped you in any way, sharing it with someone else might help them too. I'll see you in the next episode.